Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. Last talk before the coffee break. And there will be cake. It is not a lie, I'm pretty sure. Take a seat. All right. Do your stakeholders sometimes think they know what to build before they understand research findings?
Yeah.
Have you been asked to drive strategy and you don't know where to start? The next speaker will share tips and tricks from her experiences leading teams and projects at Meta and Google and how to influence strategy and stakeholders with research data. Please welcome her. With a warm round of applause, Dr. Jennifer Romano, founder and executive coach at UXR Coach.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here today. I've been in Germany for a couple of days and I've been sick. I actually lost my voice, so I'm happy it's back so I can actually be here to speak with you today and share some of my experiences. So I want to share some of the things that I've learned through the years working for teams at Facebook, at Instagram, at Google, and other places that I've been. But before I do that, I want to talk about ego. Because what I have learned in my many years of experience is that ego often gets in the way of our job, of driving strategy, of influencing products. So don't let your ego get in the way. The things I'm going to cover today are collaboration, communication, and influencing. And ego can certainly get in the way of these things. Some of the ways that I've seen ego get in the way, for example, with collaboration, is you think your work is more valuable than others. You don't need to collaborate with other teams, with other disciplines, because your work is valuable. You're an expert. They hired you at Google, at Facebook. They hired you at these places because you're an expert, because you're a badass. So you don't need to collaborate with anybody. Your work is valuable. That's ego. That's ego getting in the way of what we're here to do. Communication. I don't need to share anything until I'm ready. I'm not ready yet. I'm still working on synthesizing my findings. I'm still working on putting everything together to tell a great story. They can wait. I'm not ready. That's ego. That can get in the way of what we're here to do. And influencing. I'm really known in the industry. I don't need this BS. I'm an important person. I'm an expert. That's ego. I've seen this happen over and over with junior level people, people who are hired right off the bat, who think they are a badass. They are. They're hired by these great companies, right? They are experts. They're really smart people. I've seen this with senior level people. So it's not like it's a certain kind of person or a certain number of years of experience where I've seen this happen. I've seen this through all different levels and all different roles where ego really gets in the way of driving strategy. So my recommendation and the thing that I want you to think about as I'm sharing these things today is to remember who you work for and what your ultimate goal is. If you want to have your own company and do your own thing, have these attitudes. Let your ego guide you. It's probably not a great idea either, but when you're working for a company and we're working to improve products, then it's important to put the ego on the shelf and remember what we're there to do and what our goal is. I'll come back to this a few times today. Okay, so let's talk about collaboration. Sometimes you simply need more data. Some of you may have heard these things before. So there might be low buy-in for research. Maybe your stakeholders say, we already have analytics. We know what users are doing. We're monitoring them every single day, understanding what they're doing, what they're clicking on, how much time they're spending on pages. We know what they're doing. We don't need research. Or sometimes stakeholders just want more. We as researchers know that oftentimes we don't need a large sample to understand problems, right? You don't need a lot of people to understand that there is a roadblock or that people don't understand something on an app. But oftentimes our stakeholders don't understand that we don't need a lot of people to understand there are problems. So we might hear things like, you only talk to 5 people. Sometimes we want higher confidence in our findings. So you might have done some research, your team might have done some research, and they come back to you and say, we need a decision now on which design is best. We're ready to launch. We need a decision. And you might not be ready to make that decision because your qualitative research is not conclusive yet. So what do you do? Well, we need more data. So one of the things you can do is bring qualitative and quantitative research together. The qualitative, we do a lot of qualitative research. A lot of researchers focus on the qualitative. The quotes from participants in our research, the stories of our participants and our users, the problems they're having, things that are going well, things that are not going well, their behaviors, so the things people are actually doing in our research or in the analytics, and then our firsthand observations. These are really, really powerful. These are really, really strong. These are really, really common. But don't forget about the quantitative, the numbers and the experiments that we can run. Also examining behaviors, but in a different kind of way. And then, of course, surveys and analytics. We can use these together to tell a better story. We can learn the story in our qualitative research and then back it up with our quantitative. And oftentimes we could go the other way as well. We might conduct a survey and we know the quantity, we know the breadth of the perceptions or whatever it is we're measuring, but we may not understand the why. So then we might come back and do qualitative research. Oftentimes I use these methods together. It might be qual, followed by quant, followed by qual, followed by quant. It's not just bidirectional. It's not just one and then the other. It's important to think about how you can use these together. But also, there are lots of methods. I see so many researchers who only use interviews. They only use usability testing. But there are so many methods that we can use to better understand our users and to ultimately have influence with our product teams and on the products we're working with. So use a mixed methods approach. Really understand the different methods and when they're valuable and when we should be using different methods. I love this graph by Christian Rohrer. This is just one person's depiction of the many methods that we have. There are others as well. I love this one because we have, does this work? Maybe? We have, on one axis, attitudinal to behavioral, and on the other, we have qualitative to quantitative. Oftentimes, researchers focus on attitude and qualitative. So many research reports I see where people are sharing what users say, what participants say. It'll be a massive report filled with quotes from participants. And that's just not enough, right? We're here to measure behavior. We're here to understand what is working well, what is not working well, and how we can ultimately improve a product. So let's not focus solely on attitudes and on qualitative. There's lots of methods to choose from. Okay, so that's being a mixed methods researcher. But also, we could partner with others in the organization. And again, this is where ego comes into play. Because as a researcher, you might be an expert, you might be doing an amazing job, but there's so much more data, so many more resources to tap into to make your job more impactful. So we've got our designers. We're usually collaborating with designers, and we're usually working with our PMs. But what about those engineers and data scientists? How can we partner better with those roles to have access to more data and to understand more about our users? I'll share one story. One of my best experiences collaborating with multiple disciplines was when I worked on Facebook privacy. So as a researcher, I was interested in understanding what works well, what doesn't work well, what do users need to help them control their privacy. The data scientist came to me and said, people are using their privacy settings. We can see it in the data. People are clicking. We know what they're clicking on. They're clicking into their privacy settings. We know exactly which privacy settings they're accessing. It's working, right? And this is pretty common with analytics. We can see what people are clicking on, and we make assumptions about what is working well. However, the engineer came to me and said, we're getting a lot of bug reports, we're getting a lot of complaints that people can't find their privacy settings. So there's a big disconnect here. On the one hand, we had data that shows people are using their privacy settings. It was real data. It was the analytics showing what people are using, what people are clicking on. But on the other hand, we had real data. People were complaining that they couldn't find their privacy settings. So I designed a series of research projects, qualitative and quantitative, to better understand what was going on here. What was this disconnect? Now, those of you who use analytics, who are familiar with analytics, probably already know where this is going. So we designed a series of studies to understand what were people's biggest concerns, what did they do to address these concerns, where are they clicking, can they actually find the settings, when they find them, do they understand the settings, how do they feel when they find the settings, when they take an action. So we had surveys, we had in-lab studies where we had eye tracking to better understand what people were looking at before they made those clicks. We had first click studies. What we're looking at here on the left is some data from first click studies. And all those little red dots are the first click, where we asked people, what were your top concerns and where would you go to address those concerns? So this was insightful right off the bat. People were clicking all over the place to find their privacy settings. So it made sense that the data scientist, from his data, he was showing that people were finding privacy settings because he was looking at only a subset of all of those clicks, right? The engineer was looking at a subset of those clicks, all the people who couldn't find their privacy settings. So we started to understand a little bit more about what was going on here. So working collaboratively with the designer and the engineer, we then created new products that met people where they were. Instead of relying on people to know where to find their privacy settings and then to go in and understand their privacy settings and change them in ways that were meaningful to them, now we developed new products that met people where they were. So these are just a couple examples. And the first one, it says, Alex, you've logged in to a few apps using Facebook recently. We thought you might want to check who can see that you use those apps. So it's meeting the user where they are, telling them this is a privacy thing, and now do you want to check who else can see these kinds of things? And the bottom one is very similar. Jasmine, you recently commented on a post by John Smith. We want to make sure you know who can see who you interact with. So again, instead of relying on people to understand what is going on and then where to find those privacy settings, we created new products that met people where they were. So partnering with these other key players was really valuable, right? Like I alone would not have had access to the analytics. I alone would not have had access to the engineering bug reports. So I just would not have invented this research project because I wouldn't have access to that. So it's really, really powerful to partner with these other key players, other partners in the organization. For best results, what I have learned is really to triangulate. So as a researcher, I can combine qualitative methods, I can combine quantitative methods, which speak to my stakeholders in different ways, but also bring in these other roles like data science, engineering, to understand what data they have access to, and then together we can work to understand our users and build better products. So again, remember who you work for and what the goal is. This is one of those cases where researchers will sometimes say, I don't need to partner with others, I'm good. And they kind of work in a silo where they're conducting really, really great research, but they're missing the whole picture. And unless you're partnering with these other roles in the organization, you won't have the complete picture. Okay, let's talk about communication. Communication is really, really important. This is another area where I see a lot of researchers thinking they can conduct excellent research and then present, and then that's where it ends. But I like to think about communication as, it kind of goes with influence. I call it influence beyond the deck, because it's not enough to do great research and then present, and then that's the end of it. So we often begin our research by understanding our stakeholders. What are our stakeholders' concerns? What are our stakeholders' questions? What are their burning desires? What must they know? What are they frustrated with? What prior research has been done? Right, this is where we begin. And we want to know what's at risk. What is at risk for users if we don't do this research? And that's often where we are focusing. But what is at risk for the business? And this is another area where I've seen researchers fail. They focus on the users, which is great. That's our job. We're here to understand our users and make the experience better for users. But if our research is not tied to business goals and business needs, then our research really becomes obsolete. You can learn a lot about users and what users need, but if it's not attached to the business goals, then those super high up people will say, great, that's great research, but that's not what we're focused on right now. And then your job becomes obsolete. So it's really, really important to understand what those business needs are. Also, what is the culture around research? Are they excited? Are your teammates excited? Is your manager, is your VP, all the higher level people, are they really excited about research? Or do you need to convince them of the value, right? Do you need to convince them why it's even important? Why it's important to understand our users and their difficulties and how our work is attached to business goals and how we can help drive strategy. Really understanding what the culture is will help you figure out how to communicate to stakeholders. Also, who's the audience? So this is another area where I've seen researchers fail, where they share their research findings in the same way all the time. They have a standard way of sharing, usually a deck, and they share it the same way all the time. But that's not enough, because sometimes your audience is data-driven, and they need those numbers. And you know you're going to need to bring in some quant research methods and numbers and graphs and things like that. Sometimes they're not, and that's okay. Sometimes you are more into storytelling. So understanding who your audience is and how to communicate with them is very, very important. Again, remember who you work for and what your goal is. It's not enough to say, I have my tried and true method, I have my way of working, it was effective in my past, and that's how I'm going to keep doing it now. Every single company I've ever worked for, every single team I've ever worked for, I spend time on this, understanding what my audience, in this case it's my stakeholders, what they need. What kind of information do they need? What kind of information do they prefer? How often do they prefer it? How often do we need to meet? What kind of information do they need? So really understanding who your audience is and how to communicate with them is really, really important. So we can use a combination of qualitative and quantitative to influence. So I have found that even my stakeholders who are more quant appreciate the qual, right? They're hearing the data in different ways, and vice versa. My stakeholders who understand the qual, they appreciate the numbers, right? It really sets you apart, it sets you as an expert. You're telling the story in different ways. So one is understanding what they need and speaking their language, and then two is sprinkling a little bit more on top to help further their education about what you can do as a researcher, what value you bring to the team. Sorry, I'm parched. But at least I have a voice. So most of us are not writing academic papers. We're in industry, and we're not writing in this way. But you might find yourself in a role where you are still writing very academically. I'm trying to think in big tech I haven't been writing academic type papers in a long time. But when I have been working at agencies, sometimes we are. Like if we have a government client who does want findings written in this way, then I revert back to my academic writing. But usually in industry, we're not writing in this way. But again, it's important to know your audience. If this is how your client is expecting the findings, then this is how you'll have to produce it. And maybe you're not an expert at writing in this way, but you just bring in somebody else. That's, again, you don't let your ego get in the way. You bring in other people who are better at the thing than you are to help you do your job better. Usually we're reporting findings in this way. Back to the deck, we're reporting our executive summary, our methods, our findings, we're giving recommendations. This is usually how we're reporting in industry. And then sometimes, even lighter, we're just reporting like in a memo. It might be an email, it might be a doc where we're just sharing what we did and what we found in super high level. Because in industry, we're moving fast, right? It's more important to get the work done and to share the findings right away. So again, know your audience and how they're expecting the findings to be delivered. This is some data from an Instagram diary study where we wanted to understand what people thought was happening when the app was crashing. So we had some graphs and we had tables explaining how many people over the course of this diary study, how many people thought these things were happening or what problems they were having, such as unresponsiveness, videos not loading, photos not loading. We could display the data in all sorts of ways. We can also use word clouds to share how often these words occurred. Now, I have a love-hate relationship with word clouds. I actually don't like them at all, but I have found that they're really powerful for stakeholders. They love them, so I create them. It's fine. I'll create these ugly word clouds. But because people like them, they understand them. So I tend to do both, right? I'll show the graph, the table. I'll show the table and I'll explain what it means, and then I'll show the word clouds to show the depiction of what the table shows, right? It's sharing the information in different ways that resonate with the audience. Because again, what is your job? Your job is to do the research and make sure the information is resonating with your team. If you're only showing the information in the way that makes sense to you or the way that you love, you have your way of doing it and it's tried and true from your past experiences, but it's not resonating with your current audience, with your current stakeholders, then it won't take long before your job is obsolete. You need to make sure you're communicating really well. So even if you hate using a certain way of depicting the data like word clouds, if it works for your audience, then I suggest using it. This is some data from a first click survey following qualitative interviews. So again, qual and quant and qual and quant. This might not mean anything to you. It meant a lot to the stakeholders. I'll show the quant. Even when it's small samples, sometimes showing graphs is very meaningful because it's a depiction of the data. Some people think that you can only show graphs and tables and even run stats if you have a large sample, and it's not true. This isn't a statistics talk, but if you have a large effect, you can run stats on a small sample. Happy to talk to you offline if you want to talk about that. But again, even with small samples, if graphs are meaningful to your audience, if that's what they understand, then that's what you want to show. You don't just want to share the stories and the words behind it. If that's what they want, then show the word clouds. The other thing is educating over and over and over again. So I see UX researchers too often operating in silos, as I've mentioned, where they'll have a kickoff at the beginning of the project. Here's what we're going to do. Okay, we're all aligned, we're all on board. And then you don't hear from them again until the project is basically done, until we've got some data. And then they come to the team and they've got their beautiful deck of findings and they show their presentation, they show everything, and then that's it. But that's not enough. It's really, really important to educate over and over and over again. Educating about what you're doing, educating about the types of data you're collecting, educating about that business value, so the business problems we are solving, educating about your value, what you bring to the team, what you're doing here. This is a timeline from an actual project from Google, a very intense project. You can see we had qualitative interviews, we had a quantitative survey. There's a lot going on here in a super short timeline. We were partnering UXR and UXW, so writing and research, we were partnering together. At the top, we've got planning. So we were planning, we were circulating the draft plan to stakeholders. So it actually started before this, where we had our kickoff and everything. Education opportunity during planning, when we're circulating that plan. So the plan might be a Word doc, it's your moderator's guide, it's what you're going to be doing. At the top, it should state what we're doing, what the business objectives are. Repeat that over and over. You don't know if there are new people in the room. You don't know if new people have joined the company who've been added to the team. So you're educating them for the first time. There might be people in the room who were sleeping at the last meeting. They weren't paying attention. They were busy. You're educating them again. There might be people in the room who just need to hear it again. So you want to use that opportunity to educate again and again and again. Then when you're developing the plans, regrouping with the moderator, recruitment begins. Great opportunity to educate again. Hey everyone, here's where we are in the process. Reminder, here's what we're doing. Then you're sharing the plan. So the plan has been finalized. You're sharing the plan now more broadly with stakeholders. Again, education opportunity. You conduct those interviews, your first round of interviews, qualitative interviews. At the end, education opportunity. Here's what we're doing, and here's what we just learned. And then again, we're doing the synthesis. Education opportunity. You can see the pattern here. Over and over and over, you can educate. Too often, I see the education only at the beginning and only at the end. But these are opportunities throughout the entire project. Also, make your stakeholders part of the team. I've seen this grow in popularity or in practice. I've seen this grow in practice, but still not as often as I think it should be. I think this should be every single project. I've seen some researchers want to kind of hold the project tight to their chest and not invite stakeholders along, not invite them to observe. But I think that's a bad move. I think having your stakeholders part of the team, attending sessions, actually taking notes, it encourages them to pay attention to what they are seeing and what they are learning. At the end of each session, you regroup with your stakeholders and talk about what they've learned. Now, again, business goal, you're listening to them. What little things did they pick up on? What things maybe do you as a moderator, as a researcher, need to probe a little bit more on in subsequent interviews? So you have them a part of the team. They're very engaged. These two pictures here are from international research trips with, I think they were both Facebook teams, where the PM, the designer, the engineers, they were there. We were all in the room together with the participant, with the moderator, conducting research. So throughout the entire week, doing these in-home interviews, we were talking about what we were learning. They weren't back home waiting for me to come home with all of the research findings. They were there. They were part of the project. And then aligning along the way. So again, even if they're along for the ride, even if they're observing sessions, taking notes, you still want to continue aligning. Sometimes we do this at the end of every day. If you have super intense days or you're working into the evening, maybe that's not feasible. Maybe you do it every other day. Maybe you do it at the end of the week. But I find regrouping with stakeholders along the way really, really valuable to stay in sync about what you're learning, about what's important, about what's valuable. And again, ultimately, to drive strategy. You want to hear those things that are important to them. You want to share the little nuggets that you're learning along the way and make sure it's resonating, make sure they're understanding what's taking place, and making sure what you're learning is really important. Also, using multiple channels to share findings. When I was at Bridgewater, we use Slack. A lot of us use Slack. So I created channels in Slack to share research reports. Every single research report went into that channel, and it was shared with the entire company. If you have any sort of company wikis that you can get yourself into, we had a wiki with lots of other things for the company, and I just asked, can we have a research section where I can stick all of our reports? So now there's two ways people can find research reports. Many of us are remote these days. If you are in the office, if your team is in the office, I've actually printed findings and stuck them up on the wall. When I've had personas, I've blown them up and stuck them up on the wall. So this helps people to understand who you're building for. One of my favorite and most influential ways of sharing was at Instagram, where I was able to just order a television on wheels, and I played on a loop some videos from international research trips with closed captions on the bottom. So the people in the office, sitting in New York City who are building for the world could actually see who they were building for, could actually see with their own eyes who the participants are, what they were saying, what the problems they were having. That was one of my most influential. I've had colleagues who have created podcasts, so just little audio clips. So people, imagine all your stakeholders who can listen to those when they're on their way to work or while they're getting ready in the morning, or while they're doing something else. So you can be creative in how you share findings. Use multiple channels. Do not just create the deck, share your findings, and then that is it. And then other things I've done are have company-wide readouts. So anybody's invited to a findings presentation or a lunch and learn, or you could call it whatever you like. I've had some colleagues who do kind of like a fun little happy hour kind of event with music, and again, stick some findings up on the wall, but something that is available to everyone. So you might have weekly readouts to your immediate team, but then you have company readouts where anybody is invited. When I'm a contractor, I do the same thing. I do that at the end of the week. At the end of the week, I share where we're at, what we've learned this week, what we have coming up next week. So it's really just communicating over and over and over. Again, remember who you work for and what your goal is. Don't let your ego get in the way. Don't let your prior ways of doing things direct the way you do things in the future. Really think about who you're with, the company you're with, the group you're with, and how to influence, how to make sure they are hearing what you do and what you're learning over and over and over again. And then who do you want to meet with regularly? This is another area where, so I coach people who want to grow in UX research, and this is an area where I see a lot of people are not developed, I guess, are not developing. So people tend to think their stakeholders are their design, their research partners, but there's so many other people that you can partner with. So who should you be meeting with regularly and less frequently? So don't be afraid to figure out how to talk to the VP. Maybe you won't be by yourself in that meeting once a month. Maybe it'll be you and a couple other counterparts, and you can actually have some FaceTime with the VP. Maybe there are leads on other teams who are working on similar things. When I worked on privacy, for example, I found other people who worked on privacy at Google, and we met monthly to talk about what we were learning, right? So who are the leads on other teams who are working on similar things who you need to talk to? Okay, and last is influence. So you might be very influential in the external world, right? These are some of the things I've worked on through the years. You might have books, you might have peer-reviewed publications, you might have made some lists like top influencers and all these things. But here's the thing, your colleagues in-house, my colleagues at Google, they don't know. They didn't know. And frankly, they don't care. Everybody's an expert, right? I worked with some really, really brilliant people. They don't care if I'm out there publishing and presenting at conferences and things like this. Impact, when you're in-house, impact is the work you do in-house. Nobody cares about the things you're doing externally. And frankly, it might be a little bit annoying too. Like you're out of the office, you're doing all these other things. We need you in-house. We need you working on product. That's what you are hired to do. But you're an expert. So there's kind of this conflict of like, do I tell them I'm an expert? They don't really care because we all work together. We're all really smart. We're all working on all these things together. But I kind of feel like I should tell them I know a little bit about these things we're talking about. And this is difficult. It's difficult often to, be in the office and be like, hey, I have a couple books on the topic. But I think it's important. So some of the things that I've learned through the years on how to share your expertise internally is, number one, speak up, right? Like I tend to speak less. Like everybody in the room has a lot to say. Like I'll just share when I have something to share. And I've learned that's actually not a good strategy, especially when you want to share, like I'm an expert in this thing, right? You really need to just speak up, raise your hand at the table and speak up about what you know, because they don't know you know unless you share. Cite, like in your own reports, in your own research reports, cite your other work to showcase that you are an expert. Your email signature, you should put in that email signature that you're an author, that you do these things externally. Invite colleagues to your events. You're going to be speaking at a conference, invite them. Share when you return from a conference, or share when you publish. This is what I've just learned, or this is my latest publication. And then I will say that this goes both ways. So I've been involved in the UX community for a really long time. I've been on boards, I've been president and director of marketing and done all of these things. And a lot of the people I work with externally don't even know about the other things I've done, whether it's publishing or that I've even worked at, Google and Facebook and things like that. So I've learned also to go in that direction, to speak up, to share, to cite, and to present at the event. So like all you who are volunteering at this event, I invite you to actually present at the events you volunteer for, because people will think you're just a volunteer and you're a great volunteer, but they don't know that you're actually an expert in some of these domains unless you're actually presenting. And share your books, share your publications. At these kinds of events, there's always giveaways and things like that. So all of you in the audience, you've got books, you've got things you've been working on, actually bring them to these events and say you want to share them for giveaways. Because otherwise people don't actually know what you've been working on. So just to recap, some ways to drive strategy that, it's not rocket science, but we tend to forget because we're grinding away. We're doing the things we do. We're doing the things we were hired to do. But don't forget to collaborate. get outside your comfort zone, find other people in the organization to collaborate with, data science, engineers, other leads who are running similar research in other parts of the company. Use mixed methods, qualitative, quantitative. Figure out what you can add to your current toolbox to influence and to share. And then, of course, communicating. Know your audience, what kind of data speaks to them. Communicate often. Don't just communicate once. Don't just communicate in the way that is comfortable for you, but figure out how to communicate using multiple modes of communication. Find out who you need to talk to, even, like I said, VP level. I've had great success making myself known to VP level. And again, it might not be a one-on-one meeting, but maybe there's a few people in your group and you could go together and have a monthly or a quarterly meeting with VP. And then influence, share your expertise. And then again, I can't emphasize this enough. I've seen this happen way too many times. Do not let your ego get in the way. Be open. Nobody's going to take your job if you're collaborating with data science or if you're collaborating with another researcher who's working in a different team. Your job is still secure because you're a badass, you're hired to do what you're doing, and you're doing it well. But opening yourself up and collaborating with people in different parts of the organization and doing things a little bit differently will go a long way. But wait, it's never perfect. Excuse me. These are things that have worked for me. I'm sure you have things that have worked for you. I'd love to hear them. Couple of final things, be flexible, right? You might try something new and then it's like, oh, that's not working anymore. Like maybe it got stale, so I'm gonna try something else now. Bring in others as needed. So this happened to me in one organization in particular that stands out where, they hired an expert, I was doing really great work, but the founder of the company just was not buying what I was sharing. And it literally took for us to bring in an external expert to literally share some of the things that I had learned in my research, but through her words, through her mouth, he believed her. So we did that. Again, my ego could have gotten in the way there, right? Where I could have said, this is my research. Why is he believing her? It's coming out of her mouth. But hey, you know what? That worked. My job was to make sure he understood. So whether it was qualitative, quantitative, or another person, that's what worked. So that's what we did. And then identify those key decision makers early on. Have a strong support system. Figure out who is your support system, who understands your value, and you could always bring them in throughout your career, throughout your job. One quick plug, I am a chair for this conference, for the UXPA conference, which will be in Amsterdam in June, so hope to see you all there. Thank you very much.
Okay. Wir nehmen noch eine Frage nehmen wir. Thank you very much, Jen. And we have time for one quick question before we go into the coffee break. Any questions? No? It was all perfect? It was a perfect talk.
Feel free to reach out anytime.
Wait, there's one.
I'm here to chat with you anytime.
I will take it. Yeah.
Do you have any advice on how to convince people that research is important and the value of research if the company you work at doesn't? Like, how can you best? Yeah.
So, first of all, if you are a researcher there, somebody already thinks it's important.
I'm not. We don't have any.
You don't have research? Oh, you're not a researcher. Okay, understood. If you are a researcher and you're the first researcher, that kind of goes back to figure out who your support is, because there is somebody who does already believe that it's important. Okay, so if not, probably bringing in external case studies, right? Like showcasing where research has been valuable in other companies. That's probably a place to start, where you could show like analytics alone, for example, is not enough. Because oftentimes when organizations think research isn't important, they think they know enough already, right? So showcasing, my example with Facebook privacy is a great one, happy to share it with you. But showcasing case studies where, analytics wasn't enough, or A/B studies were not enough, that research really was profound in showcasing problems people had and influencing product direction. That's probably a place to start. In super easy to read format, right? Not like academic articles, not big, thick books like, hey, read this to find out why research is important. You might need to synthesize a bit, you know, where it's like a one-pager, case study after case study, but just a one-pager. So then they'll actually read it.
Maybe.
Yeah, hopefully.
Thank you very much for the question, and thank you again, Jen Romano, for
Thank you.
great talk. Thank you very much.